Hey there, kiddos, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Uncle Frank, hoping that you are having a great day, and in today's video, I'm going to be sitting back in my very squeaky chair, relaxing and having a little conversation with all of you guys about Yu-Gi-Oh, the trading card game. Specifically, a question slash suggestion that comes up fairly often for this particular card game, one that I've heard on and off now for, quite some time. And that is the idea of whether or not Yu-Gi-Oh should introduce set rotation to the game. And when I say I've heard this for a while, I mean it. I've heard some variation of this discussion since at least 2009. This is a persistent talking point in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, and for good reason too. You see, for those of you who don't know what rotation is, some card games like Magic for one of its formats and Pokemon for its main format, they have this thing where only certain sets from the most recent few years are legal for tournament play. They're the only sets you can pull cards from. Occasionally side products like special decks or something are allowed as well, but for the most part, just cards from these specific sets from the last 2 to 3 years are legal in a given game's primary format. And Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have anything like that. Instead, Yu-Gi-Oh has, it's got what these other card games would call an eternal format, where every card, unless it's banned from the game's entire history, every card ever printed is legal to play, which is quite different from what a lot of other card games have, and it's resulted in some problems for the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG, and has also led to what I think is a very interesting metagame for the card game. But there are some people out there who do genuinely believe that the game would be better off if there was a new major format where cards and sets just naturally rotated out every 2 to 3 years. And I'll have you guys know that I'm one of them, and there are, in my opinion, several benefits to introducing set rotation to a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! The big one, I think, is the simple design space nature of the game. You see, whenever a new chunk of cards comes out, whenever a new set of like 100 or so cards releases for Yu-Gi-Oh!, every single one of those cards is designed with, I think, the understanding that there's going to be some kind of weird interaction with older cards, sometimes intentionally, other times not so intentionally. You see, Konami's card design team cannot reasonably be expected to cross-check and play test and reference every single deck and archetype and specific card that exists in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. And we see quite often, I think, that new cards releasing will empower certain old decks, or maybe even a specific old card will have a very weird interaction with some new mechanic. And it results in this very interesting situation where sometimes out of the blue, an old card that you'd never think twice about can suddenly become quite necessary for the metagame. And it results in this kind of weird situation where I personally believe that some design is constrained for new sets. Introducing a rotation would really free up a lot of design space, especially for what I would call returning mechanics. Not necessarily archetypes coming back and getting new versions of themselves, but maybe some of that mechanic being recycled. Some of those card effects perhaps getting a fresh coat of paint on them, with new cards that are designed to interact with a much more limited card pool. Cool stuff. The other thing, or I suppose what I should say, is that this would lead into is reducing power creep. Maybe not necessarily forever, but it would definitely slow power creep down. You see, with a smaller card pool, Konami has within their grasp the ability to kind of dictate the strength and speed at which power creep goes up or down. In fact, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, if done well, if it's done right, for Konami to kind of experiment with stronger or weaker metagames, kind of on a set-by-set basis. They can release, for instance, 6 sets in a row that are all around a lower, slower power level, much like what we had back in the early days of the game, where there's still some strong cards, some really cool splashy effects, but on a whole, decks aren't winning on turn 1 or 2, they're winning on turn 4, 5, or 6. That is definitely an opportunity that Konami has, and if they want to spice the game up a bit for a year or two, they could introduce a few sets with some really wacky cards that do all kinds of crazy things. Another thing that it does, kind of as a byproduct of this, is that it makes managing format health a lot easier. Since Konami doesn't have to go back and check every card in the game's history, there's a lot less to worry about in regards to what they release. They only have to cross-check the stuff that's new and present for their main format, the rotating format, and that, I think, is a much easier task. It's also easier on the new players. You know, newer players, one of the biggest obstacles they have towards Yu-Gi-Oh! As a game is the sheer size of the existing card pool. Yu-Gi-Oh!'s card library is robust, and there's a lot of old cards and a lot of weird effects and a lot of weird rulings that newer players can struggle to fully acclimate to, especially in a very diverse metagame where there's all kinds of different decks running around. In a more limited card pool that a standard and rotation-based format would provide, it would be much easier to onboard new players since there's a much smaller card pool to work with that will be much easier to get new people into, which is really cool. And I've got to say, another thing that would be nice is just there would be more, I shouldn't say more need for reprints, but reprints would have a better home in this new standard format, this new rotating format. You see, right now, reprints do provide a very useful service to Yu-Gi-Oh! Maybe not one that's completely appreciated, but reprints do give people access to some of the oldest cards in the game. In a new rotating format, reprints would also provide the service of introducing older cards into the newer formats. You know, you could have a policy where cards aren't legal unless they've been printed in a set from the most recent 2 years. So let's say if Konami, for instance, wants to add a new Stardust Dragon archetype to their new rotating format, they can make sure that one of those sets has a Stardust Dragon reprint in there, which would not only A, give people access to the card if they don't already have it, but B, introduce it to the new format for play. And of course, you know, if the card ends up being a problem somehow and format health needs to be mitigated, worst case scenario, you just have to wait a year or two for Stardust Dragon to rotate out. And that's that. All really, at the end of the day, should be said is that it would be very easy, I think, if the care is there, if the intent is there, for Konami to make these formats quite healthy. I think if rotation is introduced to Yu-Gi-Oh! At any point, it would have to be synchronized. You know, sets for Yu-Gi-Oh! Would have to be released globally at the same time, which I know that there are some people who would really hate that. Some people out there like the idea of a 3-month sneak peek that Yu-Gi-Oh! Players have, thanks to the Japanese and then English releases. But I do think a unified global release would go a long way towards A, really synchronizing the overall metagame, and also B, allowing for rotation to be as healthy as it possibly could be, which is nice overall. Now, some people, you know, I think a big pushback about this is that it's just not how it's been done, but I would like to point out that Genesis, a relatively new format that does all this crazy point, all these points to determine balance and such, that's not how Yu-Gi-Oh! Was done for quite a while, and it was received quite well. Maybe not perfectly, but it was received, especially at the beginning, very well by the community. And I think rotation is a much simpler and easier way of balancing out the format as a whole. Some people will say, oh, well, this would invalidate certain decks that you just finished buying, and to that I say, decks are invalidated in Yu-Gi-Oh! Literally all the time. It's been a meme in the community for the longest time. You can spend hundreds of dollars on a deck, and then 3 months later, it's completely worthless because some new Tier 1 format deck, new tier 0 deck is out, and it's absolutely demolishing the competition. There's a general understanding, in fact, from the more hardcore Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, from what I understand, is there's this kind of built-in expectation these days that your Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks will not maintain value long-term. just because how aggressive Konami's power creep and reprint policies seem to be. So overall, in my opinion, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game that could benefit greatly from the introduction of a rotating format. Maybe not the main format at first, but do what you do with Genesis. Make it a major event at certain conventions and world championships and such. And I think if Konami wanted to, it would be very easy to make a standard format that really changes up the way the game is played. You know, how awesome would it be to have some of the even weaker cards from newer sets be high in demand just because that's all you have access to build a deck? That'd be crazy cool, and it would go a long way towards, I think, revitalizing some of the value in some of these newer boxes. You know, if you only have access to the most recent 2 years of sets, the cards in those sets are going to be more in demand naturally as a result. There's a loud motorcycle? A very slow loud motorcycle. It's 3 miles an hour and loud as hell. Anyway, all I'm really trying to say in this video is that I personally support the idea of set rotation for Yu-Gi-Oh! I think overall it would be a good idea, but I'm open to hearing arguments as to why it might not be. So if you guys disagree with me for whatever reason, let me know in the comments section below. As always, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And do all that wonderful stuff in the description. Check out the links to Discord, Patreon, TCG Player, and eBay. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Boop.